My name is Janet Collins. I'm 78 years old, and I live alone in a quiet 2-story wooden house on the outskirts of Portland. After nearly a month of cardiac treatment at a nursing home, that evening I came home earlier than expected, hoping to breathe in the familiar scent of pine and hear the wind through the trees along the porch. But when I eased open the back door with a spare key, I froze. My sons and daughter-in-law's voices carried from the kitchen, each word sharp and clear. Just one last dose and by tomorrow morning she'll pass in her sleep. The doctor will sign the death certificate right away. Everything will be ours. My heart clenched. As I started to back away, my eyes caught a dim light leaking from the crack of the basement door, one I'd kept locked for years. What would you do if you heard your own child planning to finish you off? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel, because what I discovered beyond that door changed everything. I stayed motionless on the threshold, my breath quickening in my chest. The whispers in the kitchen grew clearer when I leaned in, partly because the house was so still, partly because they never imagined anyone else was there. My daughter-in-law Lisa's voice was low but firm. Just the last dose and by tomorrow morning she'll go in her sleep. Dr. Lewis will sign the death certificate right away. He owes me a favor. He won't ask questions. I swallowed hard, my heart dropping like a stone. Before I could process it, Mark answered, his voice unnervingly cold. It has to be airtight. No loose ends. Then that contract gets signed. They're waiting. I promised them their cut, just like we agreed. A contract. Someone outside the family. I strained to listen, every cell in my body feeling like it might leap from my skin. Lisa continued, quieter but crisp. They've already wired half the money to the Cayman account. The rest comes through when everything's finished. I want out of this godforsaken town as soon as possible. And so do you. A chill ran the length of my spine. I wasn't just overhearing a plan to kill me, I was hearing one link in something much bigger, something I never saw coming. I eased back, my hand still gripping the knob. If I walked in, I'd be facing two people I once loved, now strangers. If I walked away, I might miss my chance to learn what was hiding behind their words. I slipped out quietly, circled to the back, and followed the path into the garden. Moonlight washed over the rosebushes I'd planted with such joy, now standing like mute witnesses to a crime being hatched. I pressed myself behind the old oak along the east wall, where I could see both the kitchen door and the basement entrance. That basement. How many years had it been since I set foot there? After my husband died, I locked it, stashed the key in an old toolbox, and never opened it again. It used to hold tools, wooden shelves, and a few boxes of keepsakes. But now a weak yellow light bled through the narrow crack in the door, flickering in the night mist. Inside the kitchen, Lisa stood by the sink, holding a steaming cup of tea. She tipped in a small brown vial and stirred until the liquid dissolved. Mark sat at the table with a briefcase open. Once it's done, I'll call Mason. The contract will go out by expedited courier. They want everything legal on paper so no one can overturn it later, Mark said, eyes fixed on the file. Lisa gave a thin smile, setting the cup in front of him. Legal? You call this legal? It's only legal on paper. In reality, we're buying a one-way ticket to a new life. I leaned farther, catching every sound I could. They were working with someone outside, someone with enough pull to line up a doctor, paperwork, and money, and bold enough to take a cut from my death. Suddenly, Lisa looked up toward the basement door. Did you lock it? Mark nodded, then added, Don't worry. No one but us has a key. And Mom, she doesn't have the strength to wander the house anymore, least of all go down there. The words stabbed like a cold blade. To them, I was already halfway in the ground, an obstacle to remove. But the light through that crack, and Mark's overconfidence, made me wonder. What were they guarding so carefully down there, and why was the light on at this hour? I edged back toward the oak, keeping to the dark. From here, I'd see if the basement door opened. And sure enough, minutes later, Mark stood, took the briefcase, and went to it. He unlocked the door, went down, and pulled it nearly shut behind him. The yellow glow spilled even brighter through the slit. Lisa stayed in the kitchen and made a call. "Tomorrow, once it's done, you'll get your share." "Yes, as promised." "No, no meeting. Just move the paperwork Monday morning. I want out of here the minute I'm paid." Her voice was sure, without a hint of hesitation. I filed away every word, knowing each scrap might save my life. A little later, Mark came back from the basement, his face tight. "Everything's still secure down there. But we need to move fast. She can be unpredictable. Remember last year?" Lisa arched a brow. "You mean when she didn't drink that smoothie?" Mark gave a curt nod, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Exactly. One more slip like that and we lose everything." I bit my lip to keep from gasping. What I'd heard tonight surpassed every doubt I'd ever had. This wasn't a hazy nightmare, it was a fully formed plan, carefully prepared, roped to people I didn't know. I pressed closer to the wall, out of sight in case they stepped outside. Questions spun through my mind. Who is Mason? What contract is being signed? Why do they need Dr. Lewis? And what lies beneath that basement door? Chairs scraped. Mark and Lisa left the kitchen wearing different faces. Lisa satisfied, Mark brooding. As they climbed the stairs, I knew I had a narrow window to act. Standing there in the dark of the garden that used to be my pride, I saw only one truth. If I wanted to live, I had to uncover the secret of that basement light before they made their move. I stayed in the shadows for a long while, steadying my breath. The quieter it got, the more the old memories flooded back, mixed with the night chill and the strangeness rising in me. I thought of the days when this house rang with laughter, not whispered schemes like tonight. I used to be an elementary school teacher. My life was chalk dust, blackboards, and the bright eyes of children. I loved it so much that even after I retired, I volunteered to read to kids at the town library. My husband, Robert, was a gentle, steady mechanical engineer. We met at a church charity fair, and a year later we were married. This wooden house was our dream. Robert built the railings by hand and put up the bookshelves, while I filled the yard with roses and hydrangeas. We raised Mark in love and sufficiency, not wealthy, but warm and steady. I still remember the day Mark graduated. Robert hugged him and said, "You can go anywhere and do anything, as long as you keep your heart straight." I never imagined that one day our own son would step off the path of his father's words. Then came the accident. One evening 15 years ago, Robert said he was meeting an old friend to talk about fixing a woodcutter. It was drizzling, the road slick, and a few hours later the police knocked on my door. They said his car had veered off, smashed through a bridge railing, and plunged into the river. No witnesses, and no one could explain why the brakes didn't work. I drowned in grief. Mark, already in his 30s and living out of state, rushed home for the funeral. He held me a long time, but his eyes seemed to look straight through the crowd, fixed on something else. After the service, when everyone had left, I stayed in the church alone. The pastor brought me Robert's Bible, the one he kept on the pew. He said it had been found on the stairs to the vesting room, and no one knew why. I took it home, meaning to put it on the shelf. When I flipped a few pages, a small envelope slipped out. On it were a few scrawled words. "If I disappear, don't trust anyone, not even Mark." I went cold, my heart pounding so hard I had to grip the chair. The handwriting was Robert's. I knew it. But the message was too much to believe. Why would he doubt his own son? And what did disappear mean? An accident, or something else? I spent the whole night with that envelope in my hands. My mind spiraled through gaps in our life together I'd never questioned. Calls Robert took without saying who, sudden outings at night, the tense look when I asked. Then I pushed it all away. I'd lost my husband. I couldn't shatter what memories I had left with suspicion. I locked the envelope in my desk and told myself it was stress he'd never voiced. Time passed. Mark went back to work out of state, then one day announced he was getting married. I met Lisa at Christmas. She was lovely and smooth-spoken, but her eyes held a calculation I couldn't name. Robert used to say, "Eyes are the mirror of the soul," and Lisa's never truly reflected feeling. After the wedding, Mark moved back to Portland, saying he wanted to be near me and take care of Mom. I was thrilled, thinking our family would be close again. But within months, I saw Mark change. He smiled less, grew colder, and every talk circled back to money, land, or the value of the house. Lisa's dissatisfaction showed more and more. She complained about everything, from how I stacked dishes and watered plants to how I used the living room because it wasn't her style. At first I brushed it off as a generational gap. Then the offhand comments sharpened into direct criticism. One evening, reading in my room, I heard Lisa speaking softly to Mark in the kitchen. "We can't live like this forever. Your mother stays here, the deed's in her name, and we're stuck." Mark didn't argue, just stayed quiet a long time before saying, "We'll take it slow." I thought of that old envelope. The words, "Don't trust anyone, not even Mark," burned into my mind. I began to wonder if Robert had seen something in our son, or simply sensed his steps drifting from the straight road. Time went on. Mark and Lisa started making odd suggestions. They nudged me to rest somewhere with nurses on duty, to sell off a slice of land, so you don't have to strain yourself. When I refused, the house grew colder. Family dinners became rare. Conversations turned perfunctory, stripped of warmth. I kept the peace, hoping things would soften. But tonight, hearing what they said in the kitchen, I knew every doubt I'd had was real. Robert's accident, the Bible envelope, Mark's changes, Lisa's calculated presence, everything braided into a rope, pulling me toward a truth I'd been avoiding for 15 years. I clenched my hand, the papery feel of my skin mixing with the damp night air. In the garden's darkness, the flicker from the basement crack kept pulsing like a reminder. If Robert left me a warning, then perhaps that light was the door to the answer. After the icy words I heard in the kitchen that night, all my senses felt sharper. I started paying attention to every small detail in the house, things I used to overlook or brush off as I must have misremembered. And those very details, once strung together, formed a picture far more frightening than I had imagined. The first thing happened with the medicine cabinet. I have heart disease and high blood pressure, so I've long kept careful habits, writing down the day and dosage, and keeping each bottle in its own compartment. Every morning, I open the bedroom drawer and take exactly 3 pills as prescribed. But one morning, when I reached for my medicine, I noticed the small white bottle wasn't in its usual place. The label was still from my regular pharmacy, but the printed prescription date was smudged, as if someone had tried to wipe it away. I opened the cap and sniffed. The smell was different, stronger and more acrid. The tightness in my chest wasn't illness. It was the realization that someone else had tampered with something only I should ever touch. I didn't take a single pill that day. I screwed the cap back on, returned it to its spot, and pretended not to notice. A few days later, the food in the kitchen set off alarms. Lisa usually did the shopping, "So Mom can rest," she'd say. She often prepared dinner, and lately my soup or fruit smoothies carried a faintly strange note, a mild bitterness on the tip of my tongue, even though there was always a hint of vanilla or cinnamon to mask it. I quietly poured mine down the sink when no one was looking and made myself something else. After a few rounds of this, I caught Lisa watching me longer than usual, her eyes weighing me. One evening, while I pretended to watch TV, she sat beside me with a soft smile. "Mrs. Janet, you really should think about getting your will in order. We're not young anymore, and if anything happens, everything will be squared away." I tilted my head and kept my voice even. "You're overthinking it. I'm still fine." Lisa smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Just to be safe, everyone should plan ahead. You could leave things to Mark, to the grandchildren someday. It's common now." I only nodded, saying nothing more. But that line haunted me through the night. It wasn't simple advice, it felt like priming me for what they intended to do. The unease grew when I discovered the small safe in my study had been rifled through. That safe held the deed to the house, a few heirloom pieces of jewelry, and some cash. One afternoon I opened it to grab the car insurance card and found everything in disarray. The cash envelope was torn at the edge, and several documents had been pulled out and shoved back in crookedly. The combination was unchanged, which meant whoever opened it knew the code. I'd never told anyone, not even Mark, but I'd forgotten that years ago Robert knew it too. If Mark had ever seen his father open it, he would know how. Before I could check everything, Lisa called up from the kitchen asking for help carrying groceries. I relocked the safe, but my mind wouldn't settle the rest of the night. I started thinking about the envelope Robert had left in the Bible and the warning, "Don't trust anyone, not even Mark." The tipping point came when I received an envelope from the bank. Inside was a statement for the joint account Mark and I shared, the one we'd opened years back to manage home repairs and taxes. I almost never touched it. But now the statement showed a withdrawal of $50,000 3 weeks earlier. The signature on the withdrawal slip was clearly not mine. Straight, sharp strokes, nothing like my round, slightly slanted hand. I took the statement straight to the kitchen. Mark was at the table, eyes glued to his laptop. "Mark, what is this withdrawal?" $50,000. He looked up, paused, then smiled. "Oh, that. Don't you remember, Mom? You agreed to let me take it out to fix the roof and upgrade the heating." I held his gaze. "I never agreed, and I never signed anything." Lisa came over from the counter and cut in. "Maybe you forgot. Your memory hasn't been what it used to be." Heat flushed my face. I taught for decades and managed hundreds of students. No one has ever called me forgetful. I drew a long breath and set the paper on the table. If I forgot, why doesn't this signature look like mine? And who took $50,000 without asking? Mark picked up the paper, glanced at it, and set it down, his voice hardening. "Who are you accusing here? This is our house, our money. Why make a big deal out of it?" I didn't answer. Instead, I went upstairs, locked my door, and sat on the bed, heart heavy. The scattered pieces, tampered pills, odd-tasting food, the safe rummaged through, the money gone, had arranged themselves into a picture clear enough to tell me the danger was already inside my home. I took my phone, photographed the statement, and sent it to an old friend at another bank. I wrote only, "Keep this for me. Please don't ask anything right now." The reply came quickly. "Got it. Be careful." I didn't sleep that night. I heard footsteps in the hallway, cupboard doors opening and closing downstairs. I lay still, eyes wide, feeling like everything around me was either evidence or a threat if I couldn't stay calm and wait for my moment. I began to realize that if I hesitated any longer, I might not live long enough to learn the truth. And the light in the crack of the basement door that night kept reminding me that the answer, and maybe my only chance to turn the tide, was in the one place they were sure I'd never go. The attack hit on a grey afternoon while I was bending to tie my shoes to go out to the garden. My heart clenched as if a fist had closed around it, my breath came short and fast, and cold sweat poured down my face. I reached for the nitroglycerin on the shelf, but my trembling hand knocked it to the floor. Before I could bend to grab it, I heard rushed footsteps and saw Mark in the doorway, his face full of worry. "Mom. Sit down now," he shouted, gripping my shoulders as he dialed for an ambulance. Lisa ran in too, but her eyes flicked quickly to the pill bottle rolling on the floor before she stepped in to steady me. Everything after that moved in a fog. The siren, the pulsing red lights, the barrage of questions from the EMTs. I was taken straight to the ER, then spent 2 days in cardiology. When I was stable, the doctor said I needed strict rest for at least a few weeks, preferably somewhere with staff monitoring me 24/7. The very next day, Mark came with Lisa. He sat by my bed and took my hand. "Mom, I think it's best if you stay at a nursing home for a while. There are nurses and doctors there, and Lisa and I would feel better. At home, well, you know I'm working all the time, and Lisa's busy too." I looked into my son's eyes, searching for the warmth of the boy I once held, and found only a cold resolve. I nodded slowly. "All right, if that's what you think." Lisa smiled lightly, as if a burden had lifted. "I'll arrange a room right away. The gardens there are lovely. You'll like it." I said nothing more, but my plans were already forming. I would go, but not empty-handed. Before I was admitted, I'd hidden a spare house key in the bottom of my vanity drawer. When Lisa brought my robe and personal things, I quietly tucked the key into the inner pocket. I also kept a small flip phone they thought I'd thrown away. I wrapped it in a handkerchief, pushed it deep into my robe pocket, and kept it for when I needed to reach out without anyone knowing. The nursing home they chose was on the outskirts, about a half-hour drive from my house. The room was clean, the bed wide, and the window looked out on maples. The nurses and aides were kind, but I felt it clearly, this wasn't where I belonged. In the first days, Mark called once. Lisa sent only short texts. One morning, I was in the common room reading when the receptionist brought me a brown parcel, saying it had been misdelivered, though Janet Collins was printed clearly on the label. The sender was an insurance company in another state. I assumed it was medical paperwork and opened it. What I found stunned me. It was a life insurance file, a policy signed less than a month earlier. Insured: Janet Collins. Sole beneficiary: Lisa Collins. Benefit amount: $1.2 million. Effective date: immediately upon signing and payment of the premium. I flipped quickly through the pages. The signature at the end bore my name, but the scrawl wasn't mine. Even the way the J was formed was completely different. A chill ran the length of my spine. This was no longer suspicion. It was clear proof they were prepping my death as a financial transaction. I closed the file just as the nurse on duty came in to say there was a call at the front desk. She left the file on the table and didn't ask anything. I used a stroll in the garden as my excuse to take the file and the old phone outside, photographed every page, and texted them to Deborah, the retired attorney I trust most. My message was brief. Urgent. Don't call back. Keep a copy safe. Deborah replied within minutes. Got it. We need to meet in person. Don't let them know you have this. I put the file back in the envelope and returned it to the receptionist, saying it was misdelivered and should be forwarded to the right person. But I knew I'd just stepped into the darkest part of the plan they were hatching. $1.2 million. That was the price they'd set on my life. That night, Mark called. His voice sounded pressed. Mom, Lisa and I will visit tomorrow. There are a few papers we need you to sign, about your health insurance. I kept my tone calm. Okay, see you tomorrow. I'll have tea ready. After I hung up, I stared out the window. Moonlight bleached the garden white. I clenched the little phone in my hand, feeling everything fall into place. They hadn't brought me here to take care of me. They'd brought me to isolate me from the house, the records, and the assets, easier to control. But they'd miscalculated one thing. I wouldn't sit and wait for a verdict. In the quiet night, I decided I would go home, and before I set foot inside, I would know exactly what they were hiding, including whatever lay behind that basement door whose light I'd seen leaking out. I planned my exit from the nursing home carefully. Without telling Mark or Lisa, I told the nurse I wanted to walk the grounds, then slipped out the side gate and called a taxi I'd arranged. In my robe pocket, the spare key felt icy, reminding me why I was going back. Dusk had fallen when the car stopped at the familiar road to my house. The gate was still locked, but I didn't want noise. I had the driver drop me at the corner. Then I walked along the fence and circled to the back. Light spilled from the kitchen window, and I heard Lisa. Her voice was low and urgent. You need to be sure. She cannot come back here and live another day. Everything's ready, once she finishes tonight's tea. Mark answered, deeper and colder. Dear. Lewis will sign. Tomorrow the contract with Mason is done. Then we're gone. I pressed against the wall, my heart pounding like it would burst. They had arranged things so tightly that if I hadn't come home that night, by morning I might have been just a name on a death certificate. When they left the kitchen and went upstairs, I finally slid the key into the basement lock. The old wooden door gave a soft click and revealed a narrow wooden stairway leading down. Damp, Cold air rose up, laced with a sharp chemical reek that turned my stomach. I switched on the small flashlight I'd brought and took each step with care. At the bottom, I stopped dead. In front of me was a finished room the basement had never had before. Freshly painted brick walls, fluorescent lights in the ceiling. In the center stood a gleaming metal table laid out with medical tools. Syringes, for tubing, test tubes, gloves. Each item neatly ordered like a mini-lab. Next to it was a tall metal rack lined with glass jars labeled with strange names. Most compounds I'd never heard of. The air around them was biting and sickly sweet. I covered my nose. I moved to the corner where a black suitcase sat on a wooden rack. When I opened it, I found bundles of cash strapped tight, all brand new $100 bills. Under the money lay a fake passport with Mark's photo but the name Andrew Miller, Canadian nationality. Next to it was a one-way plane ticket to Belize. Departure just 4 days from now. I stepped back, a cold wave running through me. Every item in that basement was part of an escape plan, and I was certain it would start only after I went away, just as they intended. But what nearly made me drop the flashlight was in a dusty wooden box on a low shelf. Inside was a stack of old photos. I picked them up and turned the first one, and my heart stopped. Robert, my husband, stood beside a young woman. Her face was unmistakable. Lisa. I sank onto a wooden chair and stared at the photo. Robert was smiling, his hand resting lightly on Lisa's shoulder, while she smiled back, looking straight into the lens as if perfectly at ease. I turned more pictures. Different times, different places, cafes, parks, a dock. Judging by the hair and clothes, they were from about 20 years ago. That meant Lisa had known Robert long before she ever met Mark. A flood of questions crashed through me. How did they know each other? Why had Robert never mentioned her? And what did this have to do with the accident that took his life? I slipped the photos into my pocket, my pulse racing but my mind clear. I knew I'd just touched a piece of truth they never wanted me to find. As I stood there thinking, the basement door above creaked. Instinct told me to kill the light and tuck myself behind the shelving. Footsteps came down a few stairs, then stopped. Lisa's voice carried, faint but distinct. Must be mice again. We need to lock this tighter tomorrow. Her steps retreated, and the door shut. I exhaled slowly, waited a few minutes, then hurried up the stairs, relocked the door, and slipped back into the garden. Moonlight washed the hydrangeas so pale they looked dusted with frost, and to me the whole garden, once a sanctuary, now felt like it was holding a massive secret on my behalf. I went back behind the shed and sat on the wooden chair Robert had built. In my hands, the stack of photos and the images from the basement kept circling through my mind. Their plan was clearer than ever, and now I knew Lisa wasn't just my son's greedy wife. She was part of a story that began long before I ever realized it. In that moment, I understood there was no turning back. If I wanted to live and learn the whole truth, I had to keep everything I'd seen that day to myself and wait for the right time to flip the board. I left the basement that night with freezing hands but a mind sharper than it had ever been. The photos of Robert and Lisa sat snug in my pocket, heavy as a stone on my chest. I knew I couldn't storm in and confront them. If I did, I'd lose every chance I had. They'd throw me out of the house again, this time straight to the cemetery. I started the next days as if nothing had happened. Mornings I still went to the kitchen. Afternoons I still sat on the porch with a book. But whenever Lisa brought me a cup of tea or a bowl of soup, I quietly swapped it out. I kept a small bottle of water in my room, waited until she turned away, poured it into my cup, then took the original liquid out to the garden and poured it at the base of a white lily I'd planted along the fence. The next morning I went to check. Yesterday's pristine white petals were now shriveled. The leaves had yellowed, and the whole pot tilted as if its life had been drained. I stood there a long time, the cold rising from the soles of my feet through my whole body. There was no doubt anymore. Whatever Lisa was bringing me wasn't a normal drink. That night I opened the flip phone I'd hidden in the drawer and dialed Deborah. We'd known each other since we were young, when she'd just graduated and worked at the town law office. Deborah's warm voice hardened as I gave her a quick summary. Janet, you have to be careful. If what you're saying is true, this isn't a family matter anymore. It's serious criminal behavior. I answered softly. I know. I need evidence, Deborah. Something the police can't ignore. Can you help me? After only a few seconds of silence, Deborah said, I'll come tomorrow evening. I'll bring a few things. But we have to be discreet. The next day, right at dusk, Deborah pulled up in her old car and parked a few houses away to avoid attention. She carried a small duffel bag. Once inside, we drew the living room curtains tight. These are mini cameras. Battery-powered with memory cards. Each can record about 30 hours. I'll place them where they usually move around. The kitchen, dining room, and the hallway near the stairs. You'll have one in your bedroom too, Deborah said as she took out devices no bigger than a thumb. I nodded, gratitude rising to my throat. You make me feel less alone. We worked carefully, choosing blind spots Lisa and Mark were unlikely to notice. The kitchen camera went up on a high shelf disguised in a spice canister. In the dining room, Deborah tucked one under the stemware rack. The bedroom camera slipped into an old alarm clock. When Deborah left, I returned to my role, a frail, slow, easily directed old woman. Lisa seemed pleased that I wasn't reacting to anything. She even asked, Did you sleep well? Tomorrow I'll make you some chamomile tea to help you relax. I gave a weak smile. Thank you, Lisa. That's very thoughtful. But inside, I was counting down the hours until we had the first footage. 2 days later, Deborah came back with a laptop to review what the cameras had captured. We sat shoulder to shoulder in my bedroom, the screen's glow tracing the lines on her face. In the kitchen footage, Lisa made tea. She opened a small drawer, took out a brown glass vial, spooned a bit of white powder into the teapot, stirred, then poured it into a cup on a tray. Look, Deborah said, her voice lowering. She checks around before she does it. That is not a normal kitchen ingredient. We kept watching. In another clip, Mark sat at the dining table on the phone. Relax, the contract will get signed. Just a few more days. My mother. She doesn't suspect a thing. Hearing my own son say those words felt like swallowing ice. Deborah placed a hand on my shoulder. We need more. To charge them, the police will need visuals, audio, and physical evidence. I nodded. I'll keep playing my part. But I also want to see what I can take from them myself. In the days that followed, I kept everything routine. When Lisa brought tea, I raised the cup to my lips but didn't drink. I poured it into another planter outside. Within hours the leaves were stippled yellow. One afternoon, with Mark out and Lisa on a call in the kitchen, I strolled past to eavesdrop. She spoke softly but clearly. No, I've increased the dose. No more than 3 days. The contract will be sent to you. And yes, I know who will sign as witness. I slipped away, my hands trembling, but I steadied my breath. The pieces were locking into place, and Deborah would know how to use them. That night, I sat in my room with the small recorder Deborah had given me tucked into my robe pocket. I captured Mark's footsteps, Lisa asking, Did she finish it today? And Mark answering, Looks like it. Her face is paler. I would keep every word like hammer blows into the truth. I couldn't let emotion take over. I couldn't let motherhood cloud my judgment. When the time came, I would bring everything into the light. But first, I needed them to keep believing I knew nothing. I knew I had enough to turn the game, but if I wanted to end this once and for all, I needed them to corner themselves. Only when they revealed their nature in front of a witness would it be undeniable. So I chose to trap them, with their own greed. That morning, when Lisa brought a tray of tea into my room, I looked up and smiled weakly. Lisa, I've been thinking. Maybe you're right. I should get everything arranged ahead of time. For everyone's peace of mind. Her eyes flashed, though her voice stayed calm. You mean, a will? I shook my head lightly. No, I want to give this house to you and Mark now. A deed of gift. That way we don't have to wait on procedures later. She set the tray down and sat carefully, suppressing a smile. That's a good decision, Mom. I'll tell Mark to prepare the papers. I feigned hesitation. But there's one condition. I'll only sign with a notary present. They need to see me sign with their own eyes. It must be absolutely legal. Lisa considered for a moment, then nodded. Of course. I'll arrange it. As soon as she left the room, I called Deborah on the little phone. We made a quick plan. She would pose as a notary, bring documents and a real seal borrowed from an old colleague. More importantly, she would secretly record the entire signing, video and audio. On the appointed day, the sky was a flat gray, like rain was waiting. I chose a pale outfit and sat near the window so the light would fall cleanly on my face. Mark and Lisa were already in the living room with a thick stack of papers on the table, tabs marking where to sign. This is Mrs. Lawrence, the notary, Lisa said when Deborah stepped in, moving slowly in a long coat and black-rimmed glasses. No one seemed suspicious. Deborah sat, pulled a few papers and a small notebook from her case, and spoke in a steady professional tone. Before we sign, I need to verify your identity and confirm you're fully lucid and not under duress. Mark smiled, flicking his eyes my way. Of course. My mother is doing this voluntarily. I nodded, meeting Deborah's gaze. I'm completely lucid and acting of my own free will. Lisa slid the stack toward me and pointed at the printed lines. Deed of gift transferring full ownership of the real property to Mark Collins and Lisa Collins. She placed a pen on top, her voice airy. Sign here and here. It'll only take a few minutes. I took the pen, letting my hand tremble like a frail old woman's. Deborah angled her notebook and pretended to jot notes, but I knew the microlens was recording every move. I signed the first page they offered, a harmless one Deborah had vetted. When Lisa flipped to the main page, I stopped. I lifted my head and looked straight into her eyes, letting the silence stretch. Lisa, I said slowly, the forged signature on that insurance policy is even worse than the fake one on this deed. The room iced over. Mark's eyebrows rose. Lisa went rigid, her hand twitching at the corner of the page. I don't understand what you mean, she rasped. I set the pen down, laced my fingers, and didn't break eye contact. $1.2 million. The policy in my name with you as the sole beneficiary. The scrawl is so sloppy a child could tell it isn't mine. Mark looked at Lisa, then back at me. You're slandering us. No one here did that. Deborah looked up, her voice calm but her eyes like blades. You should choose your words carefully. Everything today is being recorded to ensure legality. Lisa inhaled slowly, trying to recover. Mom, someone's been putting ideas in your head. I only want to take care of you. I leaned forward. Take care of me? By putting something in my tea every night? By pulling $50,000 from the joint account without asking? Or by preparing a fake passport and tickets to Belize? Mark's face went pale, and Lisa lost her composure. She glanced at Mark as if waiting for a cue, but he only muttered, She knows everything. I leaned back, my voice lower. Yes, I know everything. And today, I want my notary to witness the whole truth. Deborah closed her notebook and stood. I think we have enough. Mrs. Janet, you don't need to sign anything today. I'll deliver this recording to the appropriate party. Mark shot to his feet, his voice cracking. Who are you? You're not a real notary. Deborah answered evenly. I used to be an attorney. And I'm here to ensure Mrs. Janet isn't coerced into signing anything that strips her of her legal rights. Lisa slammed her hand on the table. This is our house. I looked at her, calmer than I expected to be. No, Lisa. This is my house. And all the evidence of what you and Mark have done is somewhere safe. The room fell silent except for the ticking clock. I saw the wobble in their eyes, the familiar calculations shattered. And I knew the board had turned. A thunder of knocking shattered the thick air in the living room. Mark and Lisa spun toward the door, but before they could move, a firm voice called from outside, Portland Police. Open up. I glanced at Deborah. She gave a small nod. Seconds later, 4 officers stepped in, flashlights sweeping the room. Martha Collins? One asked. I stood. That's me. Are you safe? He continued. I nodded. Right then, another officer moved to Lisa and ordered, Lisa Collins, you're under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder, document forgery, and insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Lisa hadn't even had time to react before she was handcuffed. She screamed, her voice shrill. She's making this up. This is my house. The officer holding her shook his head and pulled her away. Lisa tried to look back at Mark, eyes signaling something, but Mark jerked backward and suddenly bolted out the back door. Runner! An officer shouted, and 2 of them gave chase. I only caught a glimpse of Mark's figure disappearing over the backyard fence. Another officer turned to me. We have a search warrant. Please show us the way to the basement. I led them to the basement door at the end of the hallway, my hand gripping the wooden stair rail. When the flashlights swept down, the cold room with the metal table, chemical jars, and the cash-filled suitcase appeared just as it had the night I snuck in. Only this time, I wasn't alone. The officers fanned out to search each corner. One opened a metal rack and took out a thick file wrapped with a thin cord. He flipped a few pages quickly, then called to a colleague. Boss, take a look. This is a list of wire transfers to an investment fund, but the fund doesn't exist. There are also names of people tied to a fatal accident 15 years ago. I stepped closer, my heart sinking at the number. 15 years ago. The year Robert died. The victim's name? I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. The officer read, Robert Collins. I had to brace myself on the metal table to stay upright. From deep in my chest, an old pain I thought had turned to stone rose up and stabbed hard. I turned to Deborah. Her eyes had gone somber too. And this? Another officer spoke up. He had just found a small wooden box in a cabinet in the corner. Inside was an old recorder that used mini cassettes. He set it in a player and pressed the button. Static crackled, then a familiar voice filled my ears, Robert's. If you're hearing this, it means Mark has chosen their side. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. Be careful with Lisa, she doesn't just want money. She wants to erase everything, including you. It was as if all the air had been pulled from my lungs. The basement went dead silent except for the steady whir of the player. Robert knew. He had known, and left a warning I wouldn't hear for 15 years. One officer scribbled quickly, We'll seize all of this as evidence. This could be the key to your husband's case. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the recorder, as if staring long enough might let me see Robert somewhere, watching over me. Deborah set a hand on my shoulder and murmured, Janet, you were right to come back. Now everything is clear. Another officer approached. We'll keep pursuing Mark. Based on the evidence and this recording, he'll face multiple serious charges, not just the attempt on your life. I drew a deep breath to steady my voice. Please find him. I need to hear him explain himself, even once. They kept searching, uncovering more USB drives, external hard disks, and envelopes of cash marked with initials, likely the partners in the sham investment fund. Each new discovery cut deeper into the memories I'd tried to lock away. Robert's death in an accident that now might not have been accidental at all. When they sealed the basement, I stood on the stairs looking down, feeling as if I'd just sent part of my life into the dark. But I knew the truth wouldn't be buried anymore. Deborah helped me back to the living room. Outside the window, rain had begun, soft but persistent, as if it meant to wash away the years I'd been surrounded by lies. I listened to it, but beneath the sound Robert's words still thudded in my ears like lead. Be careful with Lisa. And now I understood, the warning wasn't only for the past, but for what still lay ahead. 3 days after Lisa's arrest and the basement search, my house felt locked in high alert. Police cruised the neighborhood, Deborah slept on the living room sofa to keep watch, and every door was on remote-controlled electric locks. But I knew if Mark was still free, he wouldn't quit. On the third night, light rain fell and wind hissed through the door cracks. I sat in my room pretending to read, really straining to catch every sound. Near midnight, a soft click came from the back door. I didn't look, but my heart sped up. The security indicator on the control panel blinked. Someone had used a manual unlock. I pressed a button on the remote, and the whole lock system snapped into full seal mode. At that moment, Mark appeared in the kitchen doorway, clothes soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes churned with anger and desperation. "Mom," his voice was hoarse, "everything's ruined because of you. I've got nowhere left to go." I closed the book and set it down, keeping my voice steady. "You chose this path a long time ago, Mark. Not because of me." He walked toward me slowly, one hand buried in his coat pocket. "I didn't need to see it to know what was in there. I just need you to sign a few papers. Then it all ends. I swear I won't let you suffer." Quietly, I slipped a hand into the side drawer of my chair and took out a small recorder already running. At the same time I met his eyes. "Before you do anything, listen to this." I took the cassette tape the police had found in the basement from the drawer and fed it into a small player. Static rose, then Robert's voice, Mark's father, rang out clear. "If you're hearing this, it means Mark has chosen their side. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. Be careful with Lisa, she doesn't just want money. She wants to erase everything, including you." Mark staggered as if struck. His hand slipped from his pocket, his eyes darting wildly. "Dad, he said that." His voice trembled. I nodded, not looking away. "You betrayed the man who raised you. And now you want to erase your mother too." He stepped back, then forward again, clutching his head with both hands. "It's not what you think. I didn't have a choice. Mason will kill me if I don't do this. I just wanted to pay off the debt." I kept my tone even, though a fire twisted in my chest. "And you think killing me is the only way? Son, the police are right outside. Deborah is here too. Everything you say is being recorded. Do you want them to hear you confess from your own mouth, or do you want them to find the evidence and drag you out like a coward?" Mark lifted his head, rain and sweat tracing his cheeks. He looked around, then fixed on the recorder on the table. A beat of silence, and then the words tumbled out, like he'd given up. "Fine. I admit it. I worked with Lisa to take the assets. I forged the papers, took the money, and planned with her to make you disappear." Deborah appeared in the living room doorway, phone up and recording. Her voice was firm. "Keep going, Mark. Tell us about your father's accident." Mark looked at her, then back at me as if searching my eyes for an exit. "I gave him none. Dad's accident wasn't an accident. Mason hired someone to sabotage the brakes. I knew, but said nothing. Dad was going to go to the police, but Lisa made sure he stayed silent forever." The room seemed to tilt, but I stayed on my feet. Each word from Mark hit the floor like shards of glass, sharp and painful. Outside, police sirens wailed. Deborah nodded and stepped into the hall to signal them. Seconds later, 2 officers rushed in, pinned Mark's arms behind him, and Mirandized him. He didn't struggle, only turned to look at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, voice fading under the rain and the snap of the cuffs. I didn't answer. I knew the apology had come too late, and the truth had long outstripped every excuse. When the door shut behind them, I stood alone, listening to the steady rain on the roof, the only sound left that carried no lies or betrayal. The trial took place on a clear autumn morning, the sky bright but the air in the courtroom heavy enough to squeeze the lungs. I sat in the victims section beside Deborah as the judge read the verdict. Mark was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, asset fraud, and complicity in Robert's crash. Sentence: life in prison without parole. Lisa got 35 years for being an accomplice and for multiple financial frauds. When the gavel fell, a weight in my chest eased, But another ache stayed, because it was still my son standing at the defendant's table. Mark didn't look my way. He only bowed his head, hands clenched as if to hide his whole life inside them. Lisa was different, her eyes cold and contemptuous, as if it wasn't over. After court, I went back to the house that had once been my refuge. The police had sealed part of the scene to finish procedures, but I had to pack the rest myself. Deborah helped me sort papers and box up keepsakes. Every room carried a familiar scent mixed with memory, warm and sad at once. On the last day, I climbed to the attic to check one final time. Sunlight slanted through the small window and struck a spot in the ceiling. Something looked wedged between the beams. I reached up and tugged, and an aged yellow envelope slipped loose. On it, 2 handwritten words. For Janet. I opened it. Inside were a letter and a few old photos. Robert's familiar handwriting appeared, shaky, but clear. Janet, if you found this letter, it means I'm no longer with you. There's a truth I never told you. Lisa wasn't just someone who wandered into our lives. She's the illegitimate daughter of an old business associate of mine, a man who once threatened to destroy our family. Years ago, to protect you, I cut ties with him and severed all contact. But I knew hatred doesn't just vanish. I married you to keep you out of that storm. If Lisa comes back, understand this. She isn't only after money, she wants revenge for her father's past. I sat still, the paper trembling in my hands. So it all began in a time I'd never even known. Robert had carried a shadow to keep me safe, and that very shadow had seeded today's storm. Deborah came up and saw me sitting motionless. What is it, Janet? I handed her the letter. When she finished, she sighed softly. So the pieces finally fit. Lisa wasn't just greedy, she's carried a lifelong grudge. I pressed my lips together, tucked the letter and photos into a small wooden box, and locked it. What's past? Let it stay here. I don't want to carry it with me. We finished packing. The house felt hollow, our footsteps echoing like reminders that it was time to go. I decided to sell, not out of fear, but to close this chapter of my life. A month later, I moved to a small lakeside town where the water lies smooth under the sky and the wind only nudges the willows. There I began each morning by making tea, sitting on the porch as the mist lifts, sometimes smiling at the thought of those who've passed through my life, those who brought love, and those who sowed bitterness. My story didn't end there. The press quickly covered the case as a model example of family crime and the resilience of an older woman. They wrote about the evidence I gathered, about the courage to face my own son, and about how I turned pain into a weapon to protect myself. Each time I read those lines, I don't see a hero. I see an ordinary woman who loved, believed, and when betrayed, had to stand up so she wouldn't be swept away. For many, that might be the hardest thing, and the only way to keep living. Life doesn't just test us with blows from the outside, it wounds us through the people we once trusted most. I learned that true strength isn't avoiding the storm, it's facing it and walking through, even with a cracked heart. What do you think about what happened in my story? In that situation, would you choose forgiveness, or do whatever it takes to protect yourself, as I did? I would truly like to hear your thoughts. And if you want to stay with me and hear more real, heartfelt stories about life and family, please follow the channel so you won't miss the next ones waiting ahead.